zone for Bearden High School.
That's scary. That
One of the head people at the video. So,
y'all agree with it. I think we definitely gotta go back to the drawing board.
ribbon shots. And she says, well, I don't know if but so-and-so here knows from experience. Her mother's jogging, got attacked.
She's just listening.
So I was able to ask this woman all my questions, that I could. And she said that after this, that for her anyway, she said, I don't know if this is standard, but for her, the rest of them were just one shot at a time. So it was multiple like the first one. But she said it was like having a flu or a while hers spread out over the month. She said achy, sore, very tired.
Yeah, I heard it's quite a,
Yeah.
I mean, an ordeal.
All right.
Yeah.
Just hey, all I ask.
The,
Try.
oh,
So,
and I would think,
Yeah.
if I had to pick between, I'd pick the German Shepherd over a bat.
well, I don't know. He didn't get
Bats.
chewed up though, and she may have gotten chewed up or something.
Oh, yeah. It was just,
But
my
still.
God, bats.
That's what you know.
Oh.
But
A lot of
I hate it.
bacteria there,
Yeah, I
as
hate
well
it.
as
I hate it.
potential for rabies.
I hate it going for several reasons. Is he was looking forward to having that week with everybody at home. So,
His wife must be beyond herself,
yeah.
because she's over there and
Yeah,
he's here. And
yeah. Well, and
all this
me,
going on.
the fact that he's not got anybody there with him.
Like anybody else.
I didn't, one of my questions to this woman was what, he's there by himself, what is that a problem? But it's,
Yeah, that's one reason I brought my phone in, is because my sister is in intensive care at Vanderbilt right
thank
now.
goodness.
She's going through a bone marrow transplant, and
Oh,
then
well, that's not an
all of a
easy
sudden she
thing.
started developing fever, and they poured antibiotics into her. Her heart rate got up to like 190. I mean, it's just, so I'm trying to stay in touch.
Yeah.
Um,
I want to call the July 17th meeting to the Farragut Planning Commission to order, for those of us that are here. We have a couple of training that Mark passed out to me that I want to tell us about first here. National Flood Insurance Training Program that's put on by the East Tennessee Development District. It's going to be Wednesday, August the 13th from 12:30 to 4:30 here at the Town Hall in the community room. No reservations are required, and there's a number here. I'll pass this around, and then Mark, I'm sure, will put this up on the website for it.
Yeah.
Also, I went to this one last year about the National Flood Insurance, and it was very good from the standpoint of it. Not only do you learn about the flood insurance and the changes that have been made to it, but also how planning commissioners affect things and how your local government affects your flood insurance. So that's a good one. And then the other one, planning commission training, is tourism, sponsored by the Middle Tennessee Tourism Council and the East Tennessee Development District, July the 29th, and it's both at Jefferson City Fire Hall and the Tennessee Department of Environmental and Conservation Office on Emory Valley Road in Oak Ridge. And again, no reservations are required, 6 to 8 p.m. And there's a number for this that Mark will put up for us. But either one of those, one gives some of the hours we need, but also good information as well. Also in Citizens Forum, is there anyone in the audience that has a question, comment not related to any items on the agenda? Anybody on the Planning Commission or staff that has any comments or questions? And we'll move along to the approval of the minutes for the June 19th, 2014 meeting. Do we have any changes, questions, comments?
I move for approval.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Discussion and public hearing on a request to rezone the villas at Anchor Park subdivision located on the north side of Turkey Creek Road across from Anchor Park, parcel 59, tax map 152, parcel 001-034, tax map 153 IB 28.4 acres from R-1 to R-4 to R1 OSMR Saddlebrook Properties LLC applicant.
Okay, I think everyone's familiar with this property. The villas at Anchor Park, subdivision right across from Anchor Park on Turkey Creek Road. The area that's outlined there is the current extent of the villas at Anchor Park development. It's currently zoned R4, which is attached single family. As you may remember, from the planning commissioner's perspective, we just reapproved the concept plan for the villas back in September, they intended to build the villas in 2 phases. The southern phase has already been, they've already constructed a section of public street in there, and they had a final plat that was approved, it platted 35 lots on 11 acres. As it's currently approved, as far as the full build out for the whole development, you could have up to 99 units and 5 open space lots with a little over 12% area that would be designated as open space. Due to some changes in the market and financing issues, the current owners are selling the property, and the buyer is wanting to have the opportunity to be able to build detached housing, and since they already have one attached duplex that's constructed in a development, I'll show some pictures of that here in a minute. The only other zoning district that would allow for both detached and attached is what they're requesting. That's the R1 OSMR, Open Space Mixed Residential Zoning District. That is what the cottages at Price Farm is zoned, and as you may remember a few months ago, the cottages came before you all to go to more detached dwelling units than what they had originally had in their concept plan. Whenever someone submits a request to amend the map of the zoning map, staff always looks at what our comprehensive land use plan says for guidance. That particular parcel is actually shown on the comprehensive land use plan as medium density residential. That's the concept plan on the screen there that's currently active. But if you look in the different sections of the land use plan, this particular property that's specified for medium density residential, 6 to 12 units per acre. The question is really whether what they're requesting, the open space mixed residential, is similar in character to what's described for the general character for a medium density type residential project. If you look at the future land use map, and it's a little bit hard to see on this, but there are other areas that are specified for open space cluster residential. And when you look at the character description of the two, there's a lot of similarity. And in the staff's view, what they're considering, I think, is compatible in terms of the character descriptions between the two in the land use plan. I don't think it's an inconsistency. I think it's a very minor deviation from what is provided for in the future land use map and the land use plan. In fact, what they're requesting would actually significantly lessen the density from 99 to 62 units, and that's the most they could get. And then they would significantly have to increase the open space from a little over 12% to at least 35%, similar to the cottages at Price Farm. And you'd have more obviously more detached dwelling units. So in my view, from potentially the adjacent residents' perspective, I think it would be a net positive. And so I don't think that it's inconsistent with the land use plan, and the staff would recommend approval of this rezoning request.
Does anyone have any questions, Mark?
Any discussions with the applicant about this,
I'll show you some here's some
amendments?
I'm sorry.
Amendments that wouldn't be needed for all the documents?
Yeah, I think they're aware that they're going to have to amend everything because they're going to have to change. And this is a picture of the existing duplex out there. It's my understanding that they're going to build, although they'll be what they're wanting are detached buildings. The buildings that they're going to build will be visually compatible, and there'll be some symmetry. That's one of my concerns that I mentioned in the packet, that I think it might be good to mix some in there, but really what I'm after is that this will not look out of place in relation to what else is built in that development. I don't think they want it to look out of place anyway, because then that could detract from their marketability. But this is some pictures of what we have in there if you haven't had a chance to. Very nice looking structure. And these are some of the building pads as you go up the street. It's kind of just a steep climb straight up the hill. They've padded out where the units would have been constructed, and all that's going to have to be regraded. So they'll be coming back before you all, it's my understanding, next month with a revised concept plan and a revised preliminary plat to regrade these pads and adjust the utilities, because the utilities have been set up for the development plan that has been approved. This is kind of looking at the development toward the south, looking toward Turkey Creek Road, and you can see kind of that it's been kind of shelved out for the duplexes that were envisioned there. So
I remember we talked about the traffic and aspect of things. This will help that?
well, there'd be less density in this development than what they could currently have under the R4 by quite a bit, actually. Like I said earlier, I think it goes from 99, which is what's currently on their concept plan for the full build out, to no more than 62 units.
Over 30%.
Yeah. Applicant, you let us know who you are and give us an address.
Yes, my name is Russell Rackley with Rackley Engineering. I live on Lovell Road, 1908 Cedardale off of Lovell Road. I'm here along with Bob Money with Saddlebrook Properties and Jim Nixon here representing Saddlebrook and David Pfizer. Everything that Mark said is right on with our intentions. We fully understand that a redesign as it relates to grading utilities for the first phase and a new design for the back phase would be required in all documentations and codes, covenants, and restrictions, and everything that goes along with ultimately final plating to make the changes if in fact the zoning is approved. We think that obviously it will reduce the density greatly, so any traffic generation would be close to half or 30% less than what is already approved out here. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Mark covered it pretty much in full, but if you have any questions, myself or one of us would be happy to answer.
Anybody with any questions or comments?
You anticipating to have to do anything with the road?
Not the road that's currently constructed, no. The utilities the modifications that he mentioned would basically be transformer locations where the new lot lines, rather than having the transformer in the middle of the lot, we'll move it, but those all lay outside of the roadway itself behind the curb.
So you just terminate the stubs for other utilities and
Yeah, First Utility District.
add them in place and.
Right, they require them to be terminated at the line, but since they own the line, they can dictate, but we've already spoken to them about basically removing every other service lateral, and they're fine with that. We'll come up with a detail for the contractor of how First Utility District wants it done, and we'll do it thusly.
Any more questions or comments?
I recall when we started looking at this property some time ago, it was considered it this way to begin with. So
Yeah.
I move to approve.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Moving on to item number 4, which is discussion on an amendment to the text of the Farragut zoning ordinance, Chapter 3, Section 11, multifamily residential district R-1, to replace it with a new requirement. Ross Bradley and TDK Construction and PMG applicant.
Okay, as you all know, this has been discussed at the previous 2 planning commission meetings. And at last month's meeting, I put forth a number of questions that I was trying to get some answers to in order to try to draft some ordinance language to give us some guidance. And we didn't really get through too many of these, so after the meeting, the staff kind of talked about how to kind of precipitate a better understanding and maybe better discussion on this thing and try to get it moving along so that we can give the applicants some direction and not, hold them up so they can know at least one way or the other how you feel about these things. So we thought about just doing a bus tour. We did a 3-hour tour similar to Gilligan's Island, except we all came back. We had 6 planning commissioners and 2 people from the press, and we went out and looked at a number of buffer strips in the town because that's been a big topic of discussion and a big concern with multifamily. And hopefully got a sense of, I've got some pictures of some of the stuff we took on the tour, but it's a little bit hard to see these things. Unfortunately, some of the planning commissioners couldn't make it, and I hate that. It's just impossible to fit everybody's schedule in. But we looked at buffer strips of varying widths and levels of maturity, like this one is the one just to the west of us between Park Place and Mayor Ford's property. And then we looked at the elderly housing development off Kingston Pike to get a sense of the 25 and the 50-foot buffer. And that was a mature buffer back there at Parkview West that had been, they had mixed in some new plant material as needed. But then on the west end of their development, they had a 25-foot buffer, so you could see those transitions and what the visual difference could be. Then we looked at a 35-foot buffer. That one's at Christ Covenant Presbyterian Church. It's a newly planted buffer. Didn't have any wooded area there, and you could kind of get a sense of the depth of that. And then we looked at a number of apartment developments, both the 2 that are in the town and some that are outside of the town. We'd like to have seen more, but we had a time frame we were trying to stay on target with, and we had to rent a bus, and it was charged by the hour, so we didn't want to stay out all day. But I think we got a sense of the height of buildings, the scale, some of the amenities, how buildings are situated in relation to parking. We had a lady actually give us a tour of up at the Greystone Summit, and she had she was just excellent. Did a great job answering our questions. Gave us some information about the market for these kind of developments, some of their clientele. That development has thought of everything. I mean, I did not think of designated areas for grilling, and it was pretty cool. A dog park there as well. So really well done development. That's a 2- and 3-story development. And then we went down the hill to a lower portion, the Pinnacle, there at Greystone, to look at predominantly 3-story. And then we crossed over Hardin Valley and went over into the enclave to look at 4-story buildings and to get a sense of how these, and again, this is just these particular developments. It could, it could appear very differently depending on some other developer, but I think the consensus from the folks that attended the ride, I think they felt it was helpful to see these things up close now that they're considering doing something with this zoning district in the town. And we thought that in addition to the bus tour, we've had enough feedback from the previous 2 meetings to throw out some very, very rough drafts of what we would, want to get your reactions to. We've created some amendments to like a traditional R6, to our current R6 zoning district, and created a new R6 overlay for where you have, environmentally challenging property, and you might need to designate a lot of open space. So there's a lot of questions, and I thought if you want, unless y'all have any other direction you want to proceed in, I could go through the draft ordinances just to
Do that.
again get your reactions. If it's crap, that's fine, just let me know. It's I just want to get some feedback and hopefully get it to where something can be voted on up or down next time, if possible.
And we have 2 different things here. Can you tell us the difference?
Yeah, well, the regular, and we've kind of talked about this in the past, given there's different properties with different characteristics throughout any community, we've kind of taken the R6 and just made some adjustments to it that would be more for properties that, may have some limitations but are not severe. It wouldn't consume a significant portion of the property. And then we tried to develop a new overlay that where you have a piece of property that, a very significant portion of it is essentially undevelopable. And can you still provide for a multifamily project on that type of property and make the numbers work, for a developer and not create problems with the adjacent, residents and whatever else is abutting that particular piece of property. So we kind of designed it toward the characteristics of property, similar to the OSR and OSMR. Like Bridgemore's an OSR development. It has a lot of sinkholes, so it allows you to avoid those challenging areas, but you can count them toward your overall density, and the idea is to cluster the structures on the more developable portion of the property. And when I get to talking about that overlay, there's some things in there that you may not, we could certainly have a good discussion about, but the idea generally there is if you've got less than half of the property that's developable, in our view, you're going to have to provide some significant incentives to make the numbers work on that developable part, so that they can leave the significant portion of the property in permanent open space. Let's just, I included the existing wording in the ordinance, in the packet, and just if you want to refer back to that. But if we'll just start first with the R6 zoning district, and under the general description section, we did propose to take out the wording that restricts R6 developments to basically three different areas of the town. And what we would be looking at, similar to the rezoning that came before you earlier, is whether the request is consistent with our comprehensive land use plan and any other applicable adopted policies and, ordinances of the town. So not necessarily restrict it to 3 geographic areas, but look at it more holistically in relation to the comprehensive plan. Is everybody comfortable with that, or with that particular change? Okay. We did not, we did kind of throw this together pretty quick. So some of the stuff I may need to go back and really think about, but we didn't really change the permitted uses and structures in here from what's currently allowed. Again, this is pretty much going to be an apartment type development, but it could also allow for something that's visually comparable, like like the Parkview West development. That's basically an apartment development. Nursing homes, elderly and group housing type facilities that could visually be comparable to the traditional multifamily type development. So B didn't change. C, that's the minimum development requirements. We took out some language that dealt with blue line streams and setbacks from the top of stream banks, because that's not up to date with our current ordinances. So we felt it was a good time to take that provision out.
Well, is that because of the fact that it's covered other places?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually.
I hate to see the requirement go away.
Yeah,
It's
we have
redundant.
we have a greater requirement actually than what's listed in there.
Okay.
So this sentence has been superseded by something else, really?
Yeah, it basically, when we review a site plan for this type facility, we would just make sure, as with any site plan, that it meets all applicable ordinances, and that would be the aquatic buffer, in this case, the sinkhole ordinance, the stormwater ordinance. So we just didn't want a provision in there that could imply to an applicant that they would be held to less of a standard than we actually would enforce, because it's a less standard than what's required. We did add a one bullet item in there that the approved plan, this is referring to the site plan, shall be in compliance with the comprehensive land use plan, the pedestrian and bicycle plan, and any other adopted plans and ordinances of the town. So that's kind of a catch-all. So if an ordinance changes, the plan is still, this section's still consistent. Is everybody comfortable with that? So the big changes obviously were in the area regulations. And these are interrelated in terms of setbacks and buffer. You can't really, deal with one without the other. I'll just explain the logic of what's worded here, and just give me what your feedback is. Some of the things that we've heard in previous meetings and on the bus tour to some lesser degree is that we'd really like to build in an encouragement for people to put the buildings on the outer perimeter of the development, because the kind of perceived nuisance of a higher density residential to an adjacent neighborhood, those activities often are associated more with the parking lot, with the noises, the lights, discussions, and the stuff that goes on out in parking lots. So if we could encourage people to put the buildings on the exterior and parking interior, I think that's the kind of layout we would prefer from what I've heard so far from the planning commissioners. So we've lessened the setbacks from 50 to 35 feet where a property abuts residential or agricultural if they have the buildings on the periphery. If they have parking on the periphery, then they have to meet the current setback, both the building and the parking lot, of 50 feet. That's the side and rear setback provisions. The front setback is just some clarifications there. The buildings would be 50 feet as is currently required. But then we specify, even though this is what's required, we make it clear that the parking setback is 20 feet. And we provide some clear language on some other type of structures that are often associated with front yards and what their setbacks would be, so there's clarity on that. And then we have a provision in there on accessory structures that from side and rear property lines, they are required to be set back 100 feet. The logic there is that these kind of structures like clubhouses, pools, garbage dumpster enclosures can be real noisy. They're more likely to be a problem for adjacent residents than the actual dwelling units. So that's why there's a greater setback built into those kind of accessory structures. How do you all feel about the setback portion of that? Does that make sense? Or it is a lessening of the setback from what we currently have, if the applicant is putting the buildings on the exterior. Everybody comfortable with that? The buffer strips kind of follow a similar language. If you're talking about the front yard, we currently have a requirement for a 20-foot buffer strip in the front yard. What we've heard from the applicants, and I think some of the planning commissioners, and my personal opinion, is that we should let the applicants have the flexibility to provide a creative entrance to their developments, because I rarely ever see a high scale, high-end apartment development that doesn't look very attractive as you come into it, because they want to market it. So this would give them the language that we have in here to not require a buffer strip, but require a landscape area in the first 20 feet from where the parking lot could be to the right-of-way. And that landscape design would have to go through the Visual Resource Review Board. So there would be a public review of that landscape design. Are you comfortable with that? Does that sound? Otherwise, it's just a kind of a rigid planning of a buffer strip layout, and that's not really necessary, I don't think, in the front yard. Because these developments will still have to access a road that's classified as arterial. We're not changing that, nor would I support that, reducing that. As far as the side and the rear yard, this similar language to the setback. The buffer and the setback are kind of interrelated. That where you have adjacent properties that are zoned residential or agriculture, and the principal building is positioned along the outer periphery, that building, the buffer strip can be 35 feet rather than current requirement of 50. If you're putting the parking on the periphery, then they have to meet the current buffer requirement of 50 feet for both the parking lot and the building, similar to the setbacks. As an extra layer of protection for adjacent residential developments, we do specify that for a 35-foot buffer, that you would be required to plant it to the requirements of a 50-foot buffer if it wasn't wooded. If it's wooded, it has to be basically left alone, other than hand removal under the direction of the staff, which we allow now. We saw in Parkview West that buffer strip was manicured, and it still was a good buffer, very dense, but it looked good. And I think that's kind of what Ross and those guys want to do, I think, with the buffer. Still no grading in the buffer unless it's a complete open area, and then it would just follow the current requirements, no steeper than 4 to 1, and then have to be landscape. Let's see, and we just added some language in there also about where it abuts non-residential and non-agriculture, that you still have to have a buffer strip. but it would be 25 feet along those side and rear property lines. And then we clarify what can be constructed within a buffer strip. This is what our current practice is, but I always like to put things in writing and make them clear. You know, just because that's what we've always done. Well, it needs to be there, and so we've put it in there. What we allow in buffer strips, and it's pretty limited. We have the mature vegetation that's required to be preserved and incorporated into the buffer, and then the detention basins cannot be in the buffer strip. So that's what we're proposing with the buffer. I don't know how y'all feel about that. If that,
I just have a question.
okay.
On the C, if it's commercial on the other side, then
Mm-hmm.
the budding property or adjoining property is commercial,
Yeah.
and residential would have 25-foot buffer. There'd be a combined buffer.
Yeah. They'll have 35. They could have 35 or 50 on the commercial side. Yeah. So you could have a pretty good sized buffer there. And that's something to think about. You know, do you even need a buffer, you know, in the R6? To me, it's more of a value for the people living in the R6 development than it would be for the adjacent property owner. So maximum lot coverage, we didn't change that. We did take out reference to the floor area ratio, and we did remove the maximum lot size that was 15 acres, because there's a number of properties that are in the land use plan that are more than 15 acres that could be good candidates for a R6 development, you know, so we didn't want to restrict that, but we did keep the minimum in there, so that, you know, typically the larger developments are going to be a higher quality. There's more invested there. They're going to have more people, you know, paying into the maintenance of the area. So we did keep that in there. The density, we've talked about this at previous meetings. We proposed to go from 10 to 12 units. 12 is the high end on medium density residential in the land use plan. It's 6 to 12 units. So we feel that there is some consistency with the land use plan with that number. So are you okay with the density with that, 10 to 12? Okay. The height is one that we modified a fair amount. And really kind of what we're trying to get at here is this concept of transitions that's discussed in the land use plan quite a bit. And that is where you got an existing plan of development in an area and you superimpose something that's different, that there needs to be a visual transition between the two. So in this case, if you bring in an R6 development in the middle of two R4 developments or an R1 or R2, you know, a traditional single-family detached development, that the outer layer of structures in that R6 zoning district should have some, you know, visual symmetry with the adjacent residential developments and not look totally out of character. So what we're proposing is that you would have no buildings within 100 feet of the periphery property line, and that does include the buffer strip area. Could exceed the maximum height that's permitted in the adjacent zoning districts. So if you had a piece of property that abutted R2 or R4, most of our residential zoning districts, those initial layer of buildings that are within 100 feet of that periphery property line could not be greater than 2.5 stories or 35 feet, which would be something visually comparable to like Lanesboro or Derby Run that we looked at. Then as you come into the development, get within 100 feet of the development. Then you can go up to 3 stories or 42 feet. That's currently provided for in the ordinance where there's major arterial road access to go to that height. But I guess visually the kind of development that I'm envisioning in this kind of traditional R6 is like that one that we looked at on our first visit on the road trip. That was, to me, it was a very high quality development that, you know, wouldn't be totally incompatible with an adjacent single-family detached development. It was 2 and 3 story, and you know, pretty attractive. So that's kind of what we're trying to accomplish with that. How do y'all feel about that provision? So I know we looked at these apartments and their heights, and that did seem to be and it was kind of a concern to me. You know, to me there is a pretty significant visual difference between 2 and 4 story. And a lot of it's how you present it too. There's a lot of, you know, the scale of the building, the architecture of the building, the context.
And the topography.
Piece of property.
Yeah, how you work it into the property.
Well, the
So-
footprint was what jumped out at me, is the fact you got a 4-story building, but it's a large building.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to see, like, the Enclave, those were 4-story, what those would look like on the flatter,
Yeah.
'cause that was all hill.
Yeah.
Or the way it
Made them look bigger.
hugs the
In some
hills.
ways, that does a disservice to the 4-story.
Yeah.
Kind of makes it look more massive than it.
Yeah.
A lot of 4 stories are, and I'm sure Ross will tell you about that. But it's true. I mean, that's a lot of the topographic stuff going on in the Enclave makes those buildings look more
Really
massive
bigger.
than
Yeah.
you might see on a lot of other 4-story buildings.
I thought it fit the
How do you feel about that? This wording actually gives adjacent residential developments more protection than what we currently have, actually.
So you're saying the perimeter of the property,
If the buildings are within
Structures.
100 feet of the periphery of the R6 property, that those buildings have to be the same height as the adjacent
yeah, I
residential
think that
development.
seems fair.
But then as you go interior beyond that, then you can go up to 3-story.
Yeah.
But you could have 2 and 3. If the topography was such, you'd have.
Well, that's a
you'd
good,
have
that's a
2
good.
on one side and 3 on the other.
Well, with that, and
Similar
that's
to the
something
4
that
and
we
3
need
at
to
the
talk about, because, yeah, you could do that.
2 is facing the residential.
You could do that even if it was consistent with the adjacent residential, because that would be considered 2.5 stories if you did that. So, yeah, a lot of it would be based on the property. As long as the 2-story section was facing the, you know, the adjacent single-family development or whatever. But that might need to be
Can we work
cleaned
some
up in the
language on
wording. Yeah.
The property that we're talking about, though, is relatively flat. for the
No,
most
one
part.
of them is, yeah.
The
Yeah,
one off
one of
Camel
them's very
Station.
flat. Pretty, yeah. For here, it's very flat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're looking, on the property we're doing, we're looking at 2-story around the perimeter anyway, so we would not have no 2-3 splits, and most of your split buildings are on sites, unfortunately, that have a lot of topography, and the Enclave is kind of atypical. Usually, I've never seen a developer do a 4-story side on the parking side, and I think that those buildings are gonna be harder to lease long-term, because you've got 3 flights of stairs to climb to get to those 4 stories, and unless you have elevators in the building, that's really challenging. As I mentioned in weeks past, you want to try to typically do that where you have your shorter side closest to your parking lot. On a 2-3 split, you notice at Greystone, that's usually not a problem. I mean, you can have the 2-story side on the non-parking side facing the residence and the 3-story side facing the parking, and that's not that big of a deal. People, in our experience, don't seem to have a big problem climbing 2 flights of stairs. Over that, you have a hard time getting those residents to renew when it comes time to renew. Unless they're trying to stay in shape.
Who you
Built-in
are and give
fitness
us an
program.
address.
Sorry. Ross Bradley, TDK Construction, Murfreesboro, Tennessee.
Fitness program.
Or their built-in fitness
Yes.
program.
Yeah.
Unless you're an Iron Man or woman.
Yeah.
sure there's plenty of those there.
Is there anything we need to clean up in that language there that addresses that 2-3 split?
Now, have we got it so the accessory structures are not going to be,
Well, those are already have to be 100 feet away.
100 feet? Is that,
Yeah. That's, again, there's nothing magic to the 100 feet necessarily. We just wanted to get some space between something that could have a lot of noise and activity to the adjacent lesser dense.
I remember that was a big issue when we were talking about the development. That's the seniors living.
Oh, yeah.
That was a big issue with the neighborhood there, with garbage pickups and other deliveries and stuff that
Yeah.
might be made to there.
So as it's proposed, the garbage enclosure areas would have to be 100 feet from the periphery.
Hey, let me ask you a question. I know we have several developments where we've installed dog parks, and a lot of times when we do that, we try to put some type of covered area as a part of that dog park, and sometimes those will go on the periphery of a property. That may be considered, would that be considered an accessory structure, which?
Well, yeah, because the dog park could be a nuisance to,
It would be.
Okay, that's true.
necessary.
Yeah.
yeah.
And that's only abutting residential, so if it
Yes,
butts
sir.
commercial, it's not as big of a deal.
Right.
Okay.
So maybe you just have to, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Again, this is all draft for discussion.
What other accessory structures are you concerned about other than the trash?
Well, a clubhouse, a pool, tennis courts,
Yeah.
things like
Well, even
that, where
a maintenance.
basketball courts,
Athletic,
Yeah.
The maintenance.
skateboard,
building.
Maintenance.
yeah.
Okay. Those are
skateboard
pretty much
places.
everything except with the exception of the mall, in which the mall is the same thing where you're gonna have a lot of traffic coming around and
Right.
cars coming to it, so.
We're just basically
Okay.
wanting the quieter stuff.
Sure.
The exterior. and
Sure.
The more,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
I think that's reasonable.
Same way with the park, and that's another reason why we're encouraging the parking to be more in the core, because it's
Sure.
more noisy, can be, you can have more sight lighting that could be a distraction,
Right.
that kind of thing. I mean, we probably haven't thought of every potential accessory structure or use that could come about. There may be something that comes up that doesn't make sense to be that far from the perimeter, but, that was our idea, our thought process there.
Do we, as long as we say accessory structures, are we covered for anything that might come up, or do we need to be?
It's pretty broad,
Broad.
accessory structures, yeah.
Excuse me, I'm Mark Bollick, and I'm with the PMG Group in Knoxville, Tennessee. And in the wording that you have in here right now for setback requirements for accessory structures, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought you were saying where it abuts residential has to be 100 feet. If it abuts commercial, it could be less? Because the way it's worded right now, it doesn't say that.
I have to go back and look.
I mean, it would be to our advantage where, like on our site, where we have a hotel right next door,
Yeah.
that 100-foot really kills some of what we want to do. And it's butting
I
against a
think
commercial
that's
development.
that's a good point, 'cause that's certainly the intent was it's for,
Can that wording be added to,
yeah, we can,
could that be possibly
Yeah.
added to?
I mean, I'm fine with that, 'cause the intent there was for.
And we
had-
understand abutting a residential, you're
Yeah.
trying to create a noise buffer is what you're trying to create
Yes.
against residential use.
Yeah,
But and I just want to make sure that coming down the road, someone coming in and they're doing another development, and your intent was anything near commercial or
Yeah.
office doesn't have to have that requirement, it would be nice to.
What are you recommending the commercial to be?
I
What
would think
seems
it'd be the same setback, at least.
stay out of the
setback.
buffer.
Stay out of the
Yeah,
buffer,
buffer.
stay out of the buffer and maybe, 10 foot outside the buffer, because you're gonna need some area to grade things anyways.
Right.
And if the buffer is only 25 feet for commercial, you're talking about 35 feet then. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, that's a good point, 'cause it gives you more flexibility where you have commercial adjacent to
Yes.
to move things around.
Well, and also to clarify your intent, because, I mean, we're all sitting here listening to all this conversation, but we're also gotta think about it, that somebody who's not, once this becomes an ordinance, comes in 2 years from now, hasn't heard these conversations and don't know that the intent was strictly for residential 100.
Yeah, that needs to be clarified, yeah.
Okay.
Good
Thank
point.
you.
Yep. Certainly was the intent, it was just I just
a
missed it.
clarification.
Yeah, no, you're right, that's what we intended. Yep. Let's see, and we did add some specific language for height as it relates to accessory structures and clubhouses and comparable amenities. 'Cause they're not gonna be held to the same height as the dwelling units. So I don't know if y'all are okay with that language. Is that pretty much consistent with most of your clubhouses? They wouldn't be more than 25.
Yeah, most of them are single story. You have to
Yeah.
get an elevator or something in if you've got ADA purposes. You don't.
Yeah.
The parking, we've talked about the parking and making it more representative of how the buildings are laid out, and as you may recall from those that were on the tour, the one development is mostly, I think she said most of it was two bedroom was their biggest breakdown, and then 1 bedroom after that. And that's what I hear in this area, that 1 and 2 bedrooms are the predominant floor plans. Yeah, there are some 3 bedrooms, but for the most part, the 1 and 2 bedroom. So our current parking requirements at 2.25. Staff feels that that's a little high, based on how these buildings are actually divided up. And we just looked at a simple ratio of 1 3/4 spaces per dwelling unit. Again, this is just a minimum, so if somebody wanted to go slightly above that, they could do that. That seemed to be kind of an average of the 1 and 2 bedroom breakdowns that we've seen in other towns. I don't know how you feel about that, if you're comfortable with that.
You have 2 people living in a 1-bedroom apartment, they each have a car. And then you have 4 people living in a 2-bedroom apartment, but that's per dwelling unit.
Yeah, per dwelling unit.
2-bedroom and a 3-bedroom would still only have 1 and 3/4 spaces. That doesn't seem like enough.
Well, it can be, we can divide it out, and we've kind of done that in the past, into 1, 2, and 3 bedroom, and, put in some requirements for each of those 3. I don't think there's any that are more than 3 bedroom.
Didn't one of the places they visited say they give it according to the number of bedrooms in the apartment?
Yeah, that's what we've always wanted to do. Then this kind of does reflect that, but we can break it out 1, 2, 3 bedroom. I don't know, Ross, if you have any input on that.
Yeah, I certainly do. Most of our properties, we try to go in at 175 to 185. When you look at our unit mix, we typically go 40% 1 bedrooms, 50% 2s, and 10% 3s. And we get a lot of people that'll get a 2 bedroom that just likes to have the 2nd bedroom as an office. So, and that's not all the case. The thing about it is most developers that do this, they certainly don't want to underpark it, because if they don't have enough parking, they can't rent those units. And so we never want to put ourselves in a situation where we've underparked a development. The problem is, though, if you overpark it, or if you have too many spaces, you limit the amount of green space, and it really, to me, it's when you got to maintain those spaces year after year, keeping them paved, and marking all your markings and stuff down, and you just don't have the green space in the communities that that residents can use. So, that's kind of the give and take. I mean, it's always nice to have parking. I think sometimes when you look at it, you never need 1 space for every 1 bedroom, because you don't ever have a situation where, 1, that everybody's home at the same time, and 2, where everybody has to have 2 cars and that kind of thing. So we feel comfortable that one of the biggest things we look at is not always just that 175 or 185. is making sure we get even distribution around the development. So we may have some one-bedroom buildings that may have less than 175, whereas we may have some buildings that have 3 bedrooms that we try to get it, closer to 2.25. So it just really kind of depends on distribution of that parking throughout. So that's pretty common in other municipalities, 175, 185. I mean, I think you guys were both kind of in line with that as we were making that proposal. One thing, if we can back up for 1 second, I forgot to mention on the building height. You mentioned on here on the 3-story about doing 3 stories or 42 feet. 42 feet is extremely tight from the standpoint that if you're doing a building, and most Class A developments go 9-foot ceilings, if you go 9-foot ceilings and a relatively steeper pitch roof, which I think in most people's opinion, a little steeper roof is a more attractive building. It can be tight to get into that 42 feet. If we can maybe look at a foot or two, it gives a developer a little bit more flexibility, because I don't think most people are going to want to go 8-foot ceiling heights, and it's hard to maintain that Class A development if you're having to go 8-foot ceiling heights. So that
What about 45? Is 45?
45 would be great.
Would that take
45 would
care
be
of
great.
it?
I think as long as you're keeping with 3-story, I think that's fine. It
45.
gives a developer a little bit more flexibility to do the taller ceilings and stuff.
Yeah, and usually the steeper roof pitches are more attractive to me than the flatter roofs. Well, it depends on how you lay it out, but oftentimes that's the case. Yeah, if you're comfortable with 45, I'm personally okay with that. I don't think there's a huge visual
Yeah, I
difference.
think that's fine.
If
So-
everybody else is comfortable with 1 3/4 spaces,
Do you think it should be broken down 1, 2, 3, Ross, or just the way we have it, it's pretty flexible?
Honestly, I think the developer's going to make that call at the end of the day if they need more.
Yeah.
175 is kind of the starting point for most developers. You're starting to see it get a little bit less because you're seeing more 1-bedrooms now. I think 175 is probably fine. I think what you'll find is some developers will come in and do more just because of their unit
Yeah,
mix.
that's just a minimum. Yeah, that's a minimum.
Yeah.
But I think the way our ordinance is currently worded, and again, we were very cautious and conservative when we wrote the R6 initially. It can create a situation where you may have more parking than you really need, and like Ross said, that's less green space and makes it look more commercial in appearance.
That was my question about, do we need a maximum because of
Yeah, I don't know. That's
I think
hard
what'll
to.
help you there is that lot coverage.
Yeah,
You got 50% lot coverage. That's kind of pulling that back some.
that?
yeah, that's true.
I guess I'm looking at some of our commercial that have huge parking.
Yeah, of course, there's 70% lot
Yeah.
coverage versus 50 here.
Okay.
But yeah, that's a good point. Let's see, we just added some real rough language in here for architectural design. The reason we didn't get very prescriptive here is because obviously we're working on architectural design standards right now that, hopefully will be completed to some degree by the end of the year, but that's going to be a while. What we wanted is to have some language in here in the interim that would require a certain minimum level of architecture. So that's kind of what we put together. We can kind of revisit that and adjust it. It's pretty general right now. They shall include a masonry element. Well, I don't know to what extent. Some of the images on the screen, Ross had actually provided me these, and these show some different breakdowns of materials. This is a development in Gallatin. It's got 75% stone and brick. And you got one here in Louisville, 40% stone, brick.
So when the architectural information is finalized and we
Mhm.
have it, it will supersede anything we say in here as far as.
Yeah, it would likely, we may have to amend that. I need to think about this a little bit more anyway, because this whole, I mean, what we were just trying to do is have something in place in the interim that would at least, and I don't think either of these developers are gonna, not want to do this anyway. Because if you got a visually appealing product like we saw at the Summit, I mean, it's marketable. But also make it clear what we don't want to see, like fabricated sheet metal and vinyl siding, so that we do have some provisions in there that would prohibit materials that I think we would definitely not want to see in these kind of developments. But we can beef that up a little bit.
Hey,
We
Mark.
may actually run that by our consultants, since they're already
Yes.
working for the town, and
I
kind of
just
get
don't want us to get ourselves too low on this and
Yeah.
not.
right. Yeah.
One thing you might want to do, just as a comment from what we've seen in other municipalities, in Murfreesboro, where we're from, they had a general architectural requirement list, but then they also asked that when a developer submit their site plans to staff, that they also submit color boards. We had some guys that submitted, it looked like a bright pink building. It was awful. And after that policy got enacted, where things like colors, which I know you kind of stick with earth tones, and it's amazing how earth tones can kind of develop into things that I don't know where in the earth they came from, but that may be something that you look at, just as having a color board as a part of that submittal.
Color board as part of the submittal.
And if I may make a little suggestion, if you are working on architectural standards for across the board for the town of Farragut, maybe with what you're putting here is just list what is not acceptable and leave it open so that when your architectural standards come into play, that would be the guideline. Or put words in here saying, these items are not acceptable and shall follow the architectural guidelines of the town of Farragut. Something along that line.
We can't put that language in there yet because we don't
But,
have
well, I mean,
anything.
yeah, but you see what I'm
Yeah.
the way I'm
That's a
going
good
is
point.
just.
Are there
just-
any other materials besides the fabricated sheet metal siding, vinyl sidings, or anything else that you all have real problems with? I don't have a problem with some metal accenting, because I think it can look very attractive. But what we're talking about is just a wall of metal sheet
Yeah,
fabricated.
this building right here actually has some metal on it. If you look at that section to what would be my far right, on that going up to between the second and the third floor
That little,
of that
yeah.
breezeway, that's got kind of a metal
Yeah,
roof
probably
coming
does.
out on it. And also the entrances, and also the entrances going into the breezeways have metal roofs. And, you can kind of get a copper look there, or you can do a colored metal, just to kind of break the building up a little bit. But the sheet metal, there's a deal done in another municipality I was in a few weeks ago, and you can actually do the sheet panels, and that, I think that was kind of your intent there, wasn't it, Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
not a good look.
Mm-hmm.
You've got-
Kind of like a mini warehouse look, I don't think.
You've
want
got
that.
high-quality material. Will we define that better, or?
Yeah, that's some other, we'll run this by our consultants, because they're
That's a
working
good
on this
idea.
anyway, and get some advice from them on this kind of transitional wording.
Yeah, I have a question about, what do you guys normally use? Like, there's that fabricated stone product, and I know it's getting better looking, but is that something you guys consider using when you?
All of these projects.
They are all that,
are
really?
all manufactured stone.
How much less expensive is it than regular stone?
This stone here, it's traditionally, it was a little bit more expensive than brick. Now, because it's become more and more popular and they've started producing more of it, it's about the same as a brick. If you go to a natural stone, it's incredibly expensive. It's just incredibly
Twice the
expensive.
amount, 3 times the amount?
I've never even priced it.
It gets back to your structure, because you've got the weight of it too.
That's true.
Yeah,
And installation.
Yeah.
I mean, piece by
On
piece.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point, too. I think it's looking better than it used to look, but I'm just curious.
Yeah.
and that's another one. If you have some people submit a color board, you actually submit those samples of that stone, and so you have a chance to look at it and say, yes, this is acceptable material, or no, this is not an acceptable material.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, thanks, that's a good suggestion.
What's the average size of the color board?
Most of them aren't terribly big because you've got to be able to transport them around. 24 by 36, somewhere in that, which is about the same size as a full-size sheet of construction plans. So typically somewhere in that range, and that may be something else you want to specify, because you may get some 4 by 8 sheets of plywood that people bring them in on, and you won't want to move them around. But
Yeah,
when you start putting
That's for a
brick
trailer.
and stone and those types of materials on there, you've got a weight issue you got to deal with. So
And of course, just didn't want somebody to come in with a paint swatch sign.
Yeah.
or something.
yeah.
okay, yeah, thanks, that's a good point.
Not sure what the-
Anything else on?
I'm not sure what the probability is, but when I think of architecturally compatible, we spent time here discussing materials, but isn't there also compatibility or consistency across the development relative to the style of the buildings themselves? I mean, you get
Yeah.
like in some oddball mixture of,
Yeah, consistency within the development, yeah. Although some mixture might actually, I mean, it depends on how it's hard to,
well, I think you want an integrated look.
Yeah.
yeah, it would have to still have an integration to it, but you could have some visually different looking buildings that might actually
So you
make
could
it
have
more
Eng-
interesting.
English Tudor and flanker right at the other end.
Yeah, well, maybe not that
Not
different.
that
but,
We did a deal in Mobile, and it had a stone on it, and it had a lap siding, a fiber cement hardy type siding on it. And then what we did is we had 30 of these buildings. They're 2-story buildings. They had garages. They looked like townhouses. And all we did, they were the same color except for the trim. And we did 3 different trim colors. And so you had just slight variations between buildings that were only 3 different trim colors. And so you had kind of a dark, maybe a light, and some of
Yeah,
the
but to me, that's
earth tones.
consistent and integrated as opposed to
Yeah.
different styles.
Yeah.
They had that at that one, was it the Summit? Where some of the buildings had blue doors and blue trim, and the other had red doors and red trim, but it was all,
Yeah.
which I thought was kind of,
We usually,
Interesting.
if you look at this picture, the building to the right is called a carriage building. It's got 6 garages on the bottom and 2 units above. A lot of times, we will go with a little different color on those, and then our larger buildings, that way it kind of breaks up the side a little bit more. So they kind of are still in the same color family, but they're not, they just kind of give you a little bit of breakup. So,
That carriage type building is kind of what I'm envisioning for these perimeter
yeah.
type buildings. Is that kind of what you're?
our deal will be completely different than these. It'll be 2-story buildings. I think there's 8 units in a building, 6 garages. We may have, closer to the interstate, we may have some larger buildings that are kind of more interior and towards the back of the site, but right now, it's primarily, I think the last count, I think there were 33 buildings that were these 2-story buildings with 8 units in them. So just about everybody has a garage that they can pull into, so we don't even have a whole lot of surface parking. Most of it's interior parking in the buildings, but,
Will there be requirements in terms of like shutters? So for instance, on this bottom left, you can see how shutters are on the top 2 floors, but on the bottom floor, they're not. I mean, are there gonna be restrictions from that perspective that we need to look at? Cause that one, doesn't seem to be consistency there. I mean, I think it looks fine, I'm just curious.
you can tell me if you don't like
That's
it.
an issue. Pardon me?
You can tell me if you don't like it.
No, I think it looks fine. I just was curious how it was, some were selected to have shutters and some
Yeah.
weren't.
Yeah, that could be some, you could submit elevations as part of your architectural review and make comments like that. This one, we've got it's hard to see
Yeah.
on these pictures. We've got brackets on there. We actually, these buildings, this is in Louisville, these buildings have the more decorative garage doors. They have a combination of lap siding, vertical siding, and shake. So we have 3 different building materials in addition to the stone that's on the building. So I was a little concerned that we may have too much going on with the building in addition to the metal and stuff, but when it got out there, it was a very handsome building.
Yeah.
And it worked well, so.
You just triggered a question in my mind. Maybe y'all discuss this on tour or whatever, but we go back to that minimum parking spaces per dwelling unit. If you've got a garage, and yet we're specifying a parking space, is that counting as a parking space?
Yes, it
How
does.
about that?
Okay,
Yep, it does.
Triggered that with me too.
okay.
think that would
I'm
be
glad you
good.
specified that.
Well, I didn't hear that.
That may be
discussion,
something,
but-
Mark, that would be helpful to put in there, because I know that'll probably be a question that,
Whether the carriage type would count as a parking space, the
If it's
garage.
got a garage.
garages.
Any
The garage
garage,
counts.
yeah.
I mean, if you say you're gonna have a minimum of 1.75, then is that gonna drive somebody to have,
Yeah.
you know, a paved parking areas?
It certainly would, yeah, we can
Yeah.
specify that, but that would certainly count,
And-
to the 1.75.
Specify that 1.75 either enclosed or unenclosed.
Yeah, I think that, that'd be clear.
That's a good way to do it.
This is, I'm gonna throw a curveball at you. These, you'll notice the building in the bottom left has garages as a part of a big building. This building, we hadn't finished the striping on this one. In some cases, we will actually stripe a space just outside the garage. And you think, well, why in the world would you want somebody parking out in front of your, up behind your garage? A lot of times, if you've got a husband and wife situation, and the husband and the wife stays at home and the husband works, he'll park outside the garage door and the wife will park inside. And in that situation, a lot of municipalities will allow you to count that towards your parking. That may be something else you would want to specify, because I know in some developments that a lot of people will do that. So it might be helpful to say whether or not that's acceptable or not.
Well, that would keep people from just randomly parking anywhere.
Yes, that's right. And some people like it just because you're exactly right. They know that that's their garage, and they can park there in that spot, and they're going to come home. If they come home late at night, they've got a spot close to their unit.
I also like
As
the,
long as it's not in an access zone.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I also like the way that you have that little area that juts out there with the tree and that green, I don't know if that's considered green space, I assume it is, even though it's not, I mean, there's no grass, but it's
Yeah.
vegetation,
It's a landscaped island.
right.
That's another great thing that a lot of municipalities, every 20 spaces, you have to have some type of landscaped island. And it
Yeah,
kinda
we have
breaks up
that.
a whole sea of
I
parking.
like that a lot.
Yeah, we have that
Yeah,
requirement.
do.
now.
We
You
have
have
that.
that in your ordinance.
Good.
Mark knows that one very well.
So I've trusted-
He's violated it many times.
Actually, I've cussed it many times.
Tried to.
But I've never violated it.
Very nice.
Okay, no, anyway. Okay, well, that's some good input there, yeah. I
Betty,
think that could
Betty
help.
has a question?
Betty, put your microphone down, I can barely hear.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Would you explain this building on the bottom left to me?
Yes. So the building on the bottom left is a 2-3 split building. So the ends are only 2-story, while the center of the building is a 3-story building. So if the top building, imagine the top building with the 2 farthest end units, top units gone. And you get these 2-3 split buildings. It's a really neat look. It's pretty expensive to build.
So there's a
step
section
down.
like on the left,
Yeah.
there's a section on the right that we're just not seeing.
Correct. Just imagine a mirror image on the other side, and that would be the full extent of that building, as opposed to a full 3-story.
That looks nice.
It's kind of a neat building. It breaks up the building quite a bit. And that
Really
was one of
nice.
the first projects we did that on, and turned out very nice. This building has garages in it. At the end, you see the garages. We actually pull a unit out and we put 3 garages in. And the way that works is the 2 of the garages, the garage to the far right, closest to the breezeway, accesses the unit directly behind on the back side of that building. The middle garage has a stairwell that goes to the unit straight above the garage. The garage on the end, I'm mixing this up. The garage on the end accesses the back. The garage closest to the breezeway actually comes out in the breezeway. So if you pull in this garage closest to the breezeway, you would have an access door in the breezeway so that anyone in that building can have an access to a garage and be able to come into a covered area in the breezeway and access their unit. So that's the way. There's all kinds of different ways the architects do that. Some of them will do an interior hallway where anyone can pull in those garages and any unit can get it, and they're not directly attached to units. We've personally found that people like to have some direct access garages into their units, from a security standpoint. So there's a lot of different ways to do garages. The carriage building on the right has the garages on the far ends attached to the unit upstairs, and we do on the second garage end, we do doors that had deadbolts on them, almost like you would see in a hotel room where you have a door leading to the unit, to the bedroom next to you, so that if you don't rent that other hotel room, you can keep that door locked. But if you have family and you want to have both doors open, you can. similar principle where they can have a 2-car garage if they want to, and that's very unique. I mean, we're in the point now where folks can move in and rent a unit with 2-car garage in an apartment, and so that's kind of a neat option for that people weren't doing before. And if they choose not to lease that second garage, you can just lock it and someone else can rent it out. Typically, these interior garages are used more primarily for storage. People will, if they have, a lot of times we'll get people that'll move in our property for 9 months to a year that are waiting on a home to be built, and they want to try to keep a lot of their stuff with them, but they may not want to furnish their apartment with it, and so they'll rent those garages out to be able to put their belongings in.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else have anything? We'll tweak the architecture stuff. We'll talk with Abe, our consultant, and get some guidance from him as well. And we also included in this language that's taken straight out of the business district 4-story zoning district that would require at least one low-impact development practice that would be incorporated into the design. I've discussed this with Ross. Apparently, he does that anyway in his projects. He does at least one of these. Some of these, are unlikely, like a green roof. But it's there as an option. But rain gardens and bioswales, those things are becoming much more commonly used. Permeable pavers. Mark Bialik was worked on the 4-story building with that project. That has all permeable pavers. We have some at the Enterprise. It looks really good. It kind of breaks that parking lot up visually, and it also allows them to not have a detention basin, so they can save make use of that real estate there for something more productive. So that's some language that we build into this, and then of course they'd have to have a landscape plan approved through the Visual Resource Review Board. Does anybody have any other comments or?
The one thing that I saw at that one, the first one we saw when the lady got on the bus with us,
Summit, yeah.
those little concrete pads for barbecue grills, I
Mhm.
thought those were kind of
What,
an
real crazy?
eyesore. I don't know what you guys thought.
Yeah, they
but-
could be, yeah.
Yeah, if that had 3 walls around it or something, and and a
Needs to
pad
be,
they could
yeah,
pull it out
kind
or
of a-
something, so you're not just looking
Yeah,
at very.
and I wondered, so I would
Yes.
assume there's restrictions for grilling on decks and things
You
like, how
can't
do you
grill
guys
on a
plan?
balcony.
Yeah.
I guess it's a fire code violation.
Uh-huh.
Grill on a balcony.
Yeah.
And so Greystone Summit, they're managed by RAM, who manages a lot of our properties. Alofa was telling me that they had that was kind of their way of saying, you can't put a grill on your balcony, but, you can bring your own grill and put it on this grilling pad. Well, we don't personally do it on our properties because you never know what people are going to put out there.
Yeah.
And we like to control that a little bit more. So what we try to do is go around and put grilling areas around the property,
Perfect.
just so you kind of can accommodate for
Yes.
that need, but yet control it.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah.
I like that idea.
Yeah, I think that would be better. I like the idea. I think it's
Yeah.
creative, but maybe having it more planned and worked into the design instead of somebody just rolls their Weber out there, and it's kind of
just hope it's a Weber though.
Yeah,
or
right.
whatever brand,
Not a 50-year-old Weber.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You got kind of a
exactly.
hodgepodge of
Well, you're right.
grills
Even
out there.
With, if the person has their own, you don't know the quality and you don't know what it's gonna
That's right.
happen.
You don't know how old it is. When's the last time they changed the burners out? When is the last time they got propane for it?
Yeah,
How
that's
long the
right.
hoses have been there? I mean, it could be a total fire hazard.
That's-
Yeah, it could be.
Do you plan on having another one of the areas that we saw, they had like a community vegetable garden?
Yeah.
You guys
We've
plan on
got
that
that on
too?
our property in the Cove in Lenore City. It's popular. Greystone Summit was one of the first ones that did it, and I really like how they did that. We copied it at the Cove. It's neat. People they like the advantages of living in apartments from the standpoint that you don't have as much maintenance and that kind of thing, but they don't like the fact that they have to go up their garden and
Right.
things like that. So, we try to incorporate those things. One of the things that we've done, and my construction guys, they always make fun of me for doing this, but I think it's a good idea, is we try to incorporate in our landscaping herbs and stuff that our residents can go and use those things so that it's not just pretty, but it's also useful. And, you know, those are little things that I believe developers are always looking at ways to set yourself apart from other developers. And so I think when you can do stuff like that and somebody can come out of their unit and clip some rosemary or whatever herb and be able to go back up to their unit and cook with it, that's just kind of a neat amenity. And not to mention those things smell good usually.
Definitely.
So, you know, we're always looking at creative ways to do stuff.
The other thing I saw that, I don't know if it was in this one or one of the other ones, is the way they sort of sheltered the dumpster, where you couldn't see the dumpster behind the wall. But I didn't ask, I should have asked her about this, about recycling. Like, how does that work too? Because the dumpster, I would assume, are there recycling areas too within your properties, or is it just
So
all-
we use a company a lot of times called Valet Waste, and that company, what they do is a resident will pay, let's say, $25 a month, and they pick up the resident's trash for them. And so Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they have a garbage can that they can sit out from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. They can sit it outside, and sometime during those hours, that person comes by and picks up their trash, and then they are responsible for recycling part of it. Nashville Metro just recently started requiring that all developments have a recycling bin. So you have your compactor, and then you also have a recycling bin that's available on site. So in that case, it's the resident's responsibility, if you don't have a valet waste, to separate your recyclables from your trash. So there's different ways to do it. I don't know what the town of Farragut has as far as recycling, if that's an option to do recycling. Most of the time in our trash, it's a third-party waste management type trash company that's coming through and pulling those compactors. And in most cases, on all of our developments, we put those in some type of trash enclosure that's covered. It's important that those things are covered so that you're not washing all that stuff out. And so there's a lot of different, we could talk all night just on trash enclosures, but that certainly is something maybe that you guys, if y'all have the capabilities, or maybe Waste Management has the capabilities of being able to separate. I think it's neat in a Class A development because a lot of people want to be environmentally friendly
and they'll
green.
pay for it, I would think.
Yeah.
too. I would, so.
So
Define Class A development as opposed to B, C,
well,
Q, whatever.
yeah, it's funny. We also do some consulting for other developers, and we have people come to us and they say, you know, we're not sure we want to go as far as doing a Class A, but we may want to do a Class B. And we say, listen, at the end of the day, go Class A. Get in the right areas where you can do Class A, because at the end of the day, you're just talking about finishes that really separate Class A from B, C, D. Really what you look at is, realistically, is the age of the property. The older a property gets, it goes from a Class A to a Class B to a Class C. And sometimes people will take a B property and they'll go in and they'll change out the countertops to granite countertops or what, you know, different finishes to upgrade it back to a Class A. And so, you know, I think in a Class A development, in most Class A developments, if I was to come into Knoxville, and Greystone Summit's probably one of the nicest properties, that was the first one that y'all visited. If you were to go in that unit, first of all, first thing you notice, it's probably a gated community. You would notice the landscaping is very well done. You've got a 24-hour fitness center. You've got a nice resort-style pool. You have those other features like the what do they call it? The raised bed planters for the landscaping. When you start to go to the interior of a building, you start looking at things like granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, ceramic tile flooring, backsplashes around the kitchen area. The sky's the limit. Everybody's always trying to outdo everybody, and so it's most Class A developments, that's the amenity package that you're getting. Greystone Summit was, if you went in that, they did a beautiful job. They have granite countertops and granite backsplashes, high-end cabinetry. It's a beautiful property. It's not surprised that they've got a waiting list on that property because it is such a spectacular property when you actually go in it. So,
So, but
That's very nice.
age is a major factor in the,
age is a factor. Age is a factor, but age is a factor in any development. If you take commercial, you're going to have Class A office space and you're going to have Class B office space, and a lot of times it just has to do with age, just simply because most of the building materials are gonna cost the same with the exception of the finishes, and there's such a small difference. If I was to not put granite countertops in and put a laminate countertop in, the difference overall is, you know, maybe $100,000, $200,000. When you're looking at a $25 million project, you're talking smaller amount. So it's just, most new properties are probably gonna be Class A. Now, there's some developers that are not Class A. I know some developers that we've had experience with, and they'll go in, they'll try to do vinyl siding, and they'll try to basically just provide housing. And there's certainly developers that do that. And I think you're wise to sit back and do architectural requirements that prevent that, because it's very frustrating to us to build Class A units. They come in and go bare bones everything, where you don't even have a garbage disposal in your kitchen, and it's like, you know, to undercut rents by $100. And it's just long term. That's what gives apartments a bad name, unfortunately. But it's just like any development. Over time, it's going to age, and it needs to be well taken care of. And even a single-family residential development, 20 years down the road, is not going to look like a brand-new development. So you hope that you've got the right property management group in there. And I think you guys are doing a wise thing by requiring at least a minimum of 5 acres, because, to your point, Mark, you've got larger properties, larger investments. You've got more established management companies that are maintaining those properties. A lot of times, these properties are going to be sold to larger REITs that will buy these things in large investments, and they do a great job managing these things, and they know exactly what they have to do landscape-wise, and do a great job keeping these things up. So I could go on and on. I don't want to take y'all's time, but if you got any other questions, I'll be happy to
Does
answer.
anybody else have anything on the regular R6 before we go to the other ordinance? Based on the discussions we've had, as I mentioned earlier, we put together a second approach to R6 developments for those properties that have environmental limitations, significant environmental limitations. And a lot of the wording in this draft, and it's very preliminary, but it's a lot of the wording is parallel with the wording that we currently have for the OSR and the OSMR, because this is essentially the same type of idea, except where you have a base zone of R6. So the permitted uses are narrowed down in this district. We also, well, in the general description, we're trying to describe what this district's trying to do, that how it provides flexibility in exchange for a lot of protection of and a lot of open space. The general minimum development requirements, a lot of that's taken from the OSR, OSMR wording, and I don't know if y'all have any questions specifically on the first page of the draft that you want to go over. This type of overlay would be, you know, there's not a whole lot of properties that probably would fit this, and so this, you know, I don't know how often this one would be used, but we thought that it might be useful to have this as an option. If you go down to the second page of this, is again, most of what's on the first page is straight from the OSR. The setback requirements is pretty similar to the regular R6. In the front yard, you do go from 50 to 35 feet for the buildings. That gives them a relaxation of setback in the front yard. Parking is still 20 feet. And then the clarifications on other structures that are commonly seen in front yard areas and what those setbacks would be. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that aspect of the setbacks?
Other than, under B, the second paragraph, where it says 20 feet from the nearest side or rear property.
Oh, on B? Yeah, let's go into B. the side and rear yard setback requirements. This is, again, similar language to what is in the proposed R6, and that is, again, this idea of trying to encourage the buildings to be on the exterior of the development. Where you have the building positioned along a side or rear property line that abuts residential or agricultural property, the setback is 35 feet. If the parking is on the periphery, then it's a 50-foot setback. And then where you have properties that are non-residential or non-agriculture around this development, then you have a setback of 20 feet for the building and parking lot from those side and rear property lines. And their reason for that is kind of related to the buffer strip, which I'll get to in a minute. And then there's clarification on the accessory structures, and again, that's something that we'll specify in there that's in relation to
Zoning.
the 100-foot is for the residential and agriculture. And I guess it would be, we'll have to think about this, but probably it could be the same setbacks as regular principal buildings where it's commercial or, the minimum distance between buildings, that's just from the OSR, OSMR. It's they're going to be more than 20 feet apart. The density is something we need to talk about. That's the highest that we've talked about in 15 units per acre. There's only one zoning district or one use that's specified in the land use plan that has that high of a density, and that's the town center district area. But again, the thought process from our perspective is if you have someone that's devoting over half the property in permanent open space, there's going to have to be some serious, I don't know if I'd call it relaxations, but incentives on the more developable areas. Now, you may not even want to provide an open space option, and that's fine. We need to talk about that too. Whether you want this kind of possibility or if you just want to stick with what we've got for the regular R6 and let that apply to any potential multifamily development. But this was just trying to address some properties that really have a lot of area that's undevelopable. I don't know if you have any questions on any of that.
Other than the
If you're-
property we're talking about now,
Yeah.
are there other areas in the town that this would fit into?
Well, you could have some properties where there's floodplain, where there's a lot of floodplain. This area back here would be potentially near what could someday become a town center area, and you might want some higher density residential within walking distance of that, in addition to the residential that would be in the town center district. And there's other properties that are specified for medium density residential throughout the town where they could have some significant challenges, and a lot of it is floodplain. You could have some steep slopes, or you could have some areas that have a lot of known sinkholes and things like that. So that's kind of where this other district came from. So how do y'all feel about the density? Just from perspective, the developments we looked at over in Hardin Valley, none of them were more than 15 units per acre. So even the 4-story, I don't remember. Hold on, let me see. I looked this up and we talked about this last November. And I'm trying to just give you a feel for densities, but the enclave, the density in there is, let's see. About 12, 13.15 in one section in phase 2, and about 12 in phase 1. So this would be a little on the, but you know, again, this type of project also would have more open space than what you see with the enclave. But you know, and the apartments that are in the town currently are not even 10 units per acre. Lanesboro is a little over 9. Derby runs like 7.75 units per acre. You know, but those are 2-story buildings, but that kind of gives you an idea. You could be talking about basically doubling the density of Derby Run, you know, for 15 units per acre. The way this would work, of course, is just like the OSR. You take the gross land area and, you know, you divide it by the density, you know, by the density allowed, and it tells you how many units you could theoretically put there. You still have to meet all the applicable requirements, so you may not be able to max out what you could do, but you know, it does give them the potential to put quite a bit on the developable portion of the property. So I don't know if y'all are, if you have a feel for whether you would be comfortable with that. You could have a situation where on the developable area, you could have tall buildings that are densely clustered, you know, but then you'd have a lot of open space, but you may or may not realize that if you're driving by. It may look like just a very, you know, massive kind of development, you know, so I don't know. I don't know how you feel about that, or, as far as it's kind of hard to know really until you see something, but that's something that theoretically could happen, because you know the idea is to cluster everything in the developable area, and you're talking about going up to 4 stories with these buildings, 15 units per acre, so it could be a lot more intensive than what's worded in the regular R6.
Hey, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Like you were saying earlier, I'm taking, for example, the parcel that we're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
It's 33 acres. We're not even going to be anywhere close to requesting anything close to 15. I don't see why you should go anything greater than what you do in the R6 of 12. I mean, you're still getting a benefit because you're basing it on the total acreage to get the dense number of units. You know, I'm saying why.
That's fine with me.
I mean, Ross and I were just talking about this a little bit, and we're not even looking at being anywhere close to 12 even with what we're hoping to propose to you. We do like a lot of the things that are in this open space because it does really affect more our property than Ross's, and we would really like for y'all to consider doing an open space one, a zoning for a property similar to what we're talking about using, because this gives us guidelines to where we can start doing a concept plan and getting something moving forward, whereas right now we can't even start that because we don't know what we're trying to bat with. You know what I'm saying? We can't even get up to bat to start designing because we don't know what we're going up against. But to be truthfully honest, I mean, think about it. At 30 acres, you're talking a difference of 150 units.
I guess I'm inclined to agree with them, because if there's
I
a hardship and we find out something's not working, I'd rather consider doing something to go up rather than something.
Yeah, to come back down. Yeah, start.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah,
Again, this is just thrown out there for you to
understand
react
your
to.
point.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
I was trying to build as much potential incentive for somebody to want to be able to
Right.
dedicate over half of the property to permanent open space.
It's gonna get back to economics of that piece of property.
Exactly what you're saying. And the other thing is if someone's trying to shoehorn 15 units per acre and on 30 acres, that's 450 units. And you have to give up half of the 30 acres. Now you gotta fit two parking spaces for every unit. That's 900 parking spaces. You physically can't do it. So, I mean, it's not physically possible. So that's what I'm saying. 12 is even highly unlikely. So, but the 12 is what y'all are talking about as a potential to be allowed in the R6. The 12 would be more than adequate in this situation also because
Fine with
the
me.
space limitations are gonna be involved in it.
Sounds good to me, too.
Yeah, that's good for me. We were just trying to build as much incentive in there, but I'm fine with 12, and we'll see how, how it goes. I don't know how often it would be used anyway, but 12's good.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Do we,
Yeah, go ahead.
do we have anything about, or is it possible to do anything about lower, number of floors closer to an adjacent?
Yeah, we need to talk about that. I mean, that's, yeah. Again, we put this together to generate comments, which I think we've been successful thus far, so that's good. I'm glad we got something out there that y'all can comment on. The height provision in this ordinance does concern me as drafted. Again, I was trying to look for ways to build as much incentive so that they would leave, that these more sensitive areas would be left alone. They could still have a reasonable project. I don't know. I don't know how, Mark, you all feel about a transitional height element similar to what we talked about with the regular R6.
Well, in regards, and I'm talking specifically about the parcel that I'm involved with.
Yeah.
In order for us to get the density, we need to be able to go with a 3-4 split, with the 3-story going on the uphill side and a 4-story on the downhill side, which would be equivalent to a 3.5-story building, I believe.
Yeah.
What you're saying, which the 50-foot height would be appropriate for. Leon's telling me 55. He's the architect.
That's the same argument Ross had is with.
Can you come up to the microphone? And please, also, we need to know who you are.
Oh, very much so. Leon Lawson, I'm with PMG, Knoxville, Tennessee, or Farragut. The same argument that Ross had of 9-foot ceiling heights in your building, 2-foot floor trusses, that's 11-foot floor to floor, times 4 is 44, a little bit of a roof, 10, so 55, 53, 55 feet gets us in the same aspect ratio as his buildings. Also, I guess, and this is kind of, you're almost, I think, drafting this for our property of sorts, although it's could be applicable to other
My
properties.
next question will not indicate that, because
Right.
I'm concerned about other properties as well, or
Sure. We have,
more residential possibilities of being
Challenging
next to you.
property.
Yeah.
Well, that would be something you'd look at when someone requested that kind of overlay. You'd have to make sure it's consistent with the land use plan, it's consistent with the surrounding plan of development.
and we also
vision of the town.
adjoin a commercial property.
Right.
And we also adjoin the frontage or the main road. We also don't adjoin any property because it's our property. So there's lots of unique attributes to our situation, which have to be weighed in the ordinance, so.
Which property is yours? I'm sorry. Which one are you referring to?
North of the interstate, the one
Okay.
that was.
Yeah.
where the-
Station. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So we have a unique piece of property that's environmentally challenged.
Has anybody ever done an inventory of the properties in the town that are, so we have a decent idea of the kinds of properties that are, quote, environmentally challenged?
We haven't, that would be your staff.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I suspect it has.
Well, we looked at that
Yeah,
when
we looked at
when we did the comprehensive land use
Yeah, I
plan
know.
update.
Not very deep.
And, but also, first of all, we would look for areas that are use compatible for the land use plan. It would need to be something that's medium density residential as it's defined in the land use plan, or an open space cluster like this property is designated in the land use plan. So, and then within those areas, then we could see which ones have serious, constraints that might be appropriate for this kind of overlay. There could be other properties besides just this one. There could be some of them, like I said earlier, that have a lot of floodplain issues could be maybe good candidates.
Well, my concern was if a piece of property has all these challenges, but the good part is right next to a residential, single family.
Yeah.
Then you're sitting there with a 4-story building looking over these houses because of the topography.
Well, I mean, that would be something that we'd have to look at as part of a rezoning, I think. We'd have to look at the surrounding plan of development as well as the land use plan to see if we think it's consistent and a protection to the existing residents. But yeah, the 4-story does concern me. We've got it in here, but based on the setbacks that we provided in the buffer strips, you could have a pretty big visual impact. Now, if there was some way to require the 3-story side to face the residential or agriculture, I think that would be more palatable. But a lot of that's topography driven, so we can word it like that the 3-story, it can't be more than 3-story that faces property that is zoned residential or agricultural.
In actuality, we are fortunate in that is our situation, is
Yeah,
that
yeah.
our 3-story is facing the residential aspects of it. So our 4-story is facing the commercial properties adjoining us.
So you'd have a little bit of height increase in
Yeah.
this versus a regular R6 where it's 2.5 stories, where it's abutting the residential. This could be 3 stories, so maybe we could word it like the 3-story on a 3-4 split. The 3-story would have to be the one that faces the adjacent property zone residential or agriculture.
But if it's not a 3-4 split, or can we require a 3-4 split?
You could require just a 3-story
3-story.
building.
Yes, and if topography works on the other side for them to have a 4-story, that's fine. But what we're concerned about is what it looks like from the adjacent
Adjacent
residential
property, right,
development,
exactly.
that it's, so,
So can you work on,
yeah, that was one that concerned me, quite frankly, was the height and the density. That's
Yeah.
why I ask you, and I'm glad they're okay with lowering the density, because that's, I think, a good thing. But we can work on that language. I think it needs to be probably,
as much as
No.
we like you folks, there are other pieces of property in town that we
Oh,
have to
sure.
consider.
yeah, it would be no higher than 3 stories as it, where it faces property zoned residential and agricultural. So we
Mark,
could,
you could possibly word it kind of like what you have in the R6, that the first 100 feet can't exceed 3 stories, and anything over 100 feet,
yeah,
something along that lines. I mean, you've already kind of approved that for
Right.
the R6 zoning, going to 2.5, 2 to 2.5, and then over 100 feet go taller. It could be a similar type thing for this type.
this would be, more of a 3-story rather than what the height is for the adjacent residential.
right.
So it could be a little bit, half a story higher.
Yeah. And then
Then
anything over 100 feet from the property line could be a 4-story.
up to 4-story,
Up to
okay,
4 stories, not to exceed.
rather than 3-story as was in a traditional R6.
Yes.
And then what the height you said, we've got 50 feet in there. You thinking 55?
55.
How does everybody feel about that?
Yep.
55. That gives you what you need as far as,
Well, and that falls along the
because
lines.
it can actually make the buildings look more attractive.
Well, and it
if you
also
have a
falls
higher
along the lines
pitch
with
on 'em.
we were talking about on the 2-story is, it gives you the ability to put 9-foot ceiling heights in the units to give a more upper scale development.
How do you feel about the buffer strip language? Well, first, let's go back to the common open space. A minimum of 50% of the gross land areas. You know, the OSR and OSMR is 35%. This is 50%. We do state in here that you can count areas designated as a buffer strip, and your stormwater basin can count toward that 50%. You could also count areas that are passive recreation, not your clubhouses and swimming pools. Those don't count, but you know, something passive that's where you're preserving the environmental integrity with that particular use or amenity could count. And that language, again, is pretty similar to the OSR, OSMR language. I don't know how, are you all comfortable with 50%? They probably are going to have more than 50% really
With
on
those
that
additional
project.
items, yeah, we will be,
Yeah.
we'll be over 50%.
Yeah. Yeah, with counting the buffer and. yeah.
Buffer and detention facilities, yes.
Getting to the buffer, the language in the front yard buffer is the same as the language in the R6 regular. There's not a requirement in the front yard. It's more left up to the designer, the developer, to come up with something creative in that first 20 feet. The side and rear yard, again, this is similar to the regular R6, and it's based on where you position the building in relation to the parking lot, that you have a greater buffer strip where you have parking on the periphery versus the buildings on the periphery. Where you have this kind of overlay abutting non-residential or non-agricultural, we did keep a minimum buffer in there, and the reason behind that is, and as I look at that property in question, there's a tree line right along what probably is the property line, usually those kind of old fence rows are cedars, red cedars, which are the best buffer tree ever. And you know, their drip line's going to typically not be more than 10 to 15 feet from that property line. So if you can kind of protect that fence row basically with a 10-foot buffer, then I think that adds an extra layer of protection really for the people that are going to be living in the R6 development. But it gives that developer more flexibility in grading, because you have an area that's not considered a buffer. They can do more grading and more work in the area where the commercial property abuts that project. So that's the reason why we kept some minimum in there, was to try to keep stuff out of the drip line of those fence row trees.
10 feet is hardly a buffer.
It's minimum, yeah.
But if you have a commercial property, they have 35. Is it, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't they
Yeah.
have 35 required already on their side?
35, could be 50, depending on what the property is
Like where the-
adjacent to it.
Like adjacent to us is the hotel. Did they not have to have a 35-foot buffer against
Yes,
our
they
parcel?
did. Yeah.
So I mean, that's equivalent to a 45. You're creating essentially a 45-foot buffer.
I mean, this buffer would be more of the developer may choose to have a wider one. He may want more space and separation, but this just gives them a little bit more flexibility in a setting where they may not need a buffer to, again, have more flexibility in the placement of buildings and other things so that they can maximize that development potential on that more developable land, and still provide some protection for anything that might be on a fence row.
So it's basically to protect the tree that may be there.
Yeah, it's basically to protect any existing trees that are on a fence row like that. I mean, we kind of debated in-house whether you even needed a buffer there. Then the more I thought about it, and the more when I looked at their property, there's a really nice screen of red cedars up through there that's the best type of screen material that would provide a lot of protection for the people that are going to be living in that development.
And in actuality, we want that buffer, the 10 feet, because we're going to augment that buffer with more plantings because we don't necessarily want to be looking into the side of a hotel. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
But we do need the flexibility to be able to grade, to be able to make the property work, so.
Okay, anything else on the buffer? Did you all have any questions? The height, will modify that to address the 3-story, you know, from residential and agricultural, and the 55 feet. Parking, that's the same as the regular R6. And we're gonna work on the architectural design component as well. We did not include in this type of option the requirement for implementing any low-impact development, because the development itself is over 50% open space, and that's probably one of the best low-impact development strategies you could ever have, is just to leave areas alone. So that's why we didn't require that to be a component in these kind of developments. If they want to do it, we'd certainly be happy with that, but it's not going to be a requirement the way we've proposed it.
Have we given you some good feedback?
Yeah, you have. Very good. I should have written this a long time ago.
2 meetings ago?
Well, yeah, I guess so. I just wanted to hear you talk, Mark. I
Oh,
guess.
Lord, you know better than that.
But
Well, the
no, that's very helpful.
the trip made a huge difference, I think, in
Yeah.
I appreciate you
questions
all.
and comments.
Yeah, well, good. I wish I'd have done that earlier too, but you know, you live and learn. So, but anyway, yeah, that's good. I think we've got some good direction. We'll go back and modify these things, and if you're okay with it, we'll present these as ordinances to vote on next time.
And perhaps we can tell the others to individually contact you, maybe if they have questions or comments.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
We appreciate your time and patience with us, too.
Maybe you guys
Thank
can buy all
you.
the other land that needs to be developed around here. We
One-
like working with
one
you.
project at a
time.
Project at a time. Unfortunately, we have to think about a lot, so.
Yeah.
We understand. We understand.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
gentlemen. Appreciate you.
Okay. Thanks.
Public hearing on proposed location of new utilities.
We don't have any this time. So.
One thing I should have said in the citizens forum part, the opening of Watt Road Extension. If anybody hasn't been on that yet,
Oh,
it is
yeah.
open and ready to
Oh,
be
yeah.
driven on.
It's good.
I
Yeah.
don't want
on
to
it.
take
Ed, have you
credit
been
of
on it?
being the first vehicle to be there. It was open.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, wow.
Yeah, Ed knows about the milling of Boyd Station Road.
Yes.
The,
Just glad you're okay, kind of okay, I
he
guess.
has a real close look at it. The July 17th, 2014 meeting is adjourned. But the extension is a nice road. As Mark said, it has